Welcome to another webinar from Palmers Solicitors. My name is BJ Chong. I'm one of the partners here at Palmers, and the topic for today is COVID-19 and a safe working environment. As a result of the coronavirus pandemic, businesses must assess how their work environment and arrangements can be made safe for employees and visitors. To help you look at the steps which may be necessary as a business to provide a safe working environment, I'm joined today by three of my colleagues from the Palmers team to help provide you with some clarity and guidance. Welcome to Jeremy Sorrell, a partner and our health and safety and regulatory expert. Also to Samantha Randall, an associate solicitor and our employment expert. And to Gina Newman, our practice manager, who spent many hours implementing safe working guidelines for our own offices. If I can turn first to you, Jeremy, can you give us a little bit of insight on what the principal law underpinning perhaps the health and safety executives enforcement parameters might be? And are there specific new laws arising from this coronavirus emergency?
Okay, sure. So the law governing health and safety effectively stems from the Health and Safety Act 1974, the regulations made under and in relation to it, and a substantial body of case law that stems from prosecutions brought under the Act. And all those things together essentially make the law concerning health and safety in this country. Now, there has been a new law brought out as a result of the coronavirus emergency. It's called the Coronavirus Act 2020, but that new law really only deals with certain, it's an emergency act dealing with emergency things. So, for example, it allows the General Synod of the Church of England to suspend elections. It does weird things like that, but it doesn't mention either health and safety or the Health and Safety at Work Act. There are some regulations made in relation to the coronavirus, but they're very much peripheral. So there isn't really any headline-grabbing new law in relation to the coronavirus. However, of course, we are all now subject to a whole host of exhortations and prohibitions handed down by government, and we're expected to follow those. And the agencies, whether it's the Health and Safety Executive or the local authority, will also therefore be expected to build those expectations in to their view of what is a safe working environment.
Right, so how does that manifest itself, Jeremy, in terms of enforcement action from these agencies?
Okay, well, the really blunt answer is no one knows for sure, because there hasn't really been any case that's yet reached through to the courts. There probably isn't going to be one for some time. But working from first principles, the reality is the Health and Safety at Work Act is there to make all of us safe at work, whether we're workers, whether we're co-workers, whether we're visitors to the premises. We have a new emergency, the coronavirus emergency, and a number of steps have been taken, and we are required as members of the public to take a number of steps in order to keep us safe from this emergency. The Health and Safety Executive and the local authority will be looking, therefore, to see whether steps that we would expect to be taken in order to keep employees safe and visitors to premises safe are being taken by those charged with that responsibility, principally employers, but not just employers. So they'll be looking at the new milieu in which we all operate to see whether there is, in fact, a danger there and whether the Health and Safety at Work Act has been breached.
So that would be, I guess, the general principle on how to avoid attracting unwanted attention from the agencies. Could you help a little bit more with what do you think the agencies might view, or how they might view a failure to, let's say, put into place a risk assessment or any safety measures that they seem to be promoting?
Okay, well, in order to avoid a prosecution, what you need to do is to make sure that you take steps to keep people safe, because that's what the agencies are looking for. And in order to know what steps you are going to take, to make people safe, you need to carry out a risk assessment. So you need to carry out a risk assessment, and I won't go into what that amounts to because Mrs. Newman will deal with that in much more detail. We need to carry out a risk assessment, and once you've carried out a risk assessment, you know what the risks are. You then need to take the action which is prompted by that risk assessment. Now, if you fail to carry out a risk assessment, or you do, but you fail to carry out the steps suggested by that risk assessment, then that's a clear opening for the authorities to start an investigation and to prosecute you, because if you fail to keep people safe by not putting in place those things that you should know you should be doing, then that's potentially an offence of failing to ensure either a safe system of work or a number of other potential discrete offences, and that will be prosecutable.
Let's assume for a moment that it's unfortunately the case that the attention of the agencies has been attracted. What should an employer or a business owner do if they're contacted by one of the agencies with regard to an investigation into possible breach?
Okay, well, first of all, this may sound obvious, but it's a bit like making sure you read the exam question. Find out what it is that they want. If they want to come down and check that you've got procedures in place or you've got paperwork in place, you've carried out a risk assessment, for example, and make sure you've got all your documentation in apple pie order and it's accessible for them. If you haven't documented a risk assessment, then make sure you do it now, because anything you don't document is difficult to prove. If they contact you with a view to interviewing you under caution, then do those things, find out specifically what it is that you want to speak to you about, and I would say obtain legal advice. Getting legal advice and perhaps getting a solicitor present with you in the interview is going to be at a cost, but almost certainly that cost is going to be a fraction of what it's likely to cost you if you fluff the interview.
Okay. As an ancillary thought, you know, a situation that I think we're beginning to see in some of the press, you know, what's your thoughts on potential reputational damage that a business owner, employee may suffer as a result of, you know, a breach of some of these guidelines?
Well, very significant potentially, because unfortunately, health and safety prosecutions tend to be newsworthy, so they're much more likely to find themselves in the local paper or on the radio or even on television. But right at the moment, there's a degree of what can only be described as hysteria concerning the coronavirus. And so any breach and any prosecution concerning that is almost certainly going to be given the star treatment. And although potential customers might view with a measure of equanimity a breach which might lead to an injury of an employee, thinking, well, I still need to buy their widgets anyway, and they've been punished now, so there's no reason why I shouldn't. They're going to view very differently a prosecution based on failing to keep customers safe as a result of a prosecution, and you're going to lose overnight. You can spend £5 million in advertising, and one prosecution will undo all of that by a factor of 100.
So yes, certainly something to sit up and take into account. Thanks for that, Jeremy. If I can move over to Gina Newman at this moment in time. Gina, if I could ask you, because you've done a lot of work in getting our offices ready and open up. Could I ask you first of all, what do you think businesses need to do to put in place some measures so that they can open back up again? So what's your experience been so far?
Businesses are required to conduct a COVID-19 risk assessment. So this is a good starting point for businesses to review and consider the changes that are required. So for example, you're going to need to think about what activities and situations within your own workplace could increase the risk of spreading the virus. So you need to consider, for example, who's likely to be at risk. And this is not just going to include your employees and members of the public, but it's anyone that's going to come into your premises. So cleaning contractors, delivery, maintenance people.
You mentioned that, and I know that, you know, in previous discussions, and Jeremy's mentioned, you know, that we have to carry out a risk assessment. Where do people find these risk assessments?
Yeah, okay. So there's a really good section. If you go to the Health and Safety Executive website, they've got a whole section devoted to assisting businesses with the COVID-19 risk assessment. And on there's even a downloadable form. So you can use that as your basis to start your own risk assessment.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment, you know, I've come along and it's time for me to open up my premises back up again. So I found the risk assessment form. So I've downloaded it. You know, what do I do next?
Okay, so once you've completed the form and you've gone in and you've highlighted the issues, the form itself, once it's completed, you need to make sure that your employees are made aware of the content. They need to be able to read it. And this is so they know the issues that you've highlighted and they know what you've put in place to minimise those risks. If you have a website, upload the completed assessment form to your website, and this means then that general public and visitors can also see what you've done. So in other words, what I'm saying here is you need to make sure that people coming into your premises can, if they want to, view your COVID-19 risk assessment.
Right, okay. Perhaps then just moving on a little bit more, could you just share a few thoughts on the sort of measures that you were putting into place to enable the Palmers Solicitors offices to be opened up to the public?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So what we did here, we actually created our own, what we call client information booklet, and we send this out to all our clients. So this guidance provides them with an overview of how we accommodate them, their appointments. So as visitors, they'll know what they need to do, what to expect from us when they come onto our premises. We've done things such as designating separate staff entrances and client entrances, and the idea behind that is it controls the flow of traffic within our building. Everyone, clients and staff included, who visit our offices are asked to take their temperature reading as they arrive, and we've put in place a reporting procedure, so if someone has a raised temperature, they know what to do and it keeps everyone safe. We've done things, for example, like marking the floors with 2-metre distancing throughout our premises. This provides a visual demonstration of how to socially distance. My experience was that some people struggled with the actual concept of what 1.5 metres or 2 metres actually looks like. So that was a good way of doing that. And then in addition to that, we've supplied things like disposable masks, hand sanitisers and wipes as well. Looking at our operating functions and how we provide our services, we then also looked at our IT systems and our own working processes, and we've upgraded those. So for example, remote working is much more effective, it's much more, the system's much more effective for that. We have video conferencing as an alternative to face-to-face meetings wherever that's possible.
Right, okay. In addition to that, do you think there are any other sort of suggestions you might want to offer to listeners, about what managers and team leaders might also find helpful based upon the work that you've done?
Okay, so I would say that as managers, before opening your business back up for business as usual, start thinking as well about how your team are going to operate. So what I did was I bore in mind that under the government's test and trace scheme, there's a potential that if someone comes in with COVID-19, you've got your entire workforce there, and you could have your entire workforce self-isolating for 2 weeks, and that could be devastating for your business. So what I would say is put in place measures. So for example, establishing a rota system where staff will rotate between working off-site and working on-site, maybe extend your operating hours, stagger your start times. So the idea is controlling the number of employees that are in the premises at the same time.
Right, okay. Then apart from showing employees, the COVID-19 risk assessment, what other things have you employed or used to ensure that all staff understand really what they need to do? Because they often say communication is critical to all of this. Yeah,
so for us, what we did here, I think it's about getting the message across and reinforcement. So what we did here is we created our own COVID-19 training video and asked all our staff to view this. And the video itself, it contains the procedures, the changes, the processes that we've introduced. In addition to this, we've got what we call a staff bulletin. These go out weekly, and within that we'll have COVID-19 reminders. So we're continually conveying information, updates, and reminding everybody on what they need to do. I think also what we mustn't forget is, very importantly, lead by example. So as a manager or business owner, you need to demonstrate yourself visually by following the agreed procedures yourself. So, for example, wear a mask when you're meeting someone for longer than 15 minutes. Regularly use hand sanitizers, and do it in front of your clients and staff to show that you're doing it, and it encourages them to do the same. What I also think is a good idea is to ask your staff for their own ideas and feeding, because by engaging them and involving them in the process, they'll feel on board, more likely to support the measures that you've put in place. And they may even come up with some suggestions that you haven't thought of that could be useful for your business.
Thank you very much for that, Gina.
Thank you.
If I now move on, perhaps I can bring you in, Samantha, here. So I've downloaded the risk assessment form. I've been through that. I've carried out all the measures required. Obviously I now need to bring people back if they're not back already. So
Yeah.
perhaps I can ask you, Samantha, the return to work. What does this actually mean for an employer?
So from the 1st of August, obviously the government announced that employees, they were technically being given the discretion to bring their staff back into the office, provided it is safe to do so. So, that could mean a number of different things to different employers, whether that is continuing to work from home, if that's already in place, and that there's no issues with that, or it could mean bringing staff back into the actual workplaces, provided that they are COVID secure and all of the measures have been taken, as Gina has already pointed out. So this in terms was a step really to try and get some normality back into the economy and to help restart it essentially. However, it's, by all means, it's not going to be everyone rushing at once to come back into the office straight away. And so businesses are probably likely to take quite a cautious approach to that. And therefore, if home working is something that's already in place for many companies, then that might be something that continues for quite some time, and particularly, as Gina noted, if staff are on particular sort of rotas in which one team are in one week and then swap into work from home the following week. So it's likely that these measures might be in place for many months to come, depending on what happens with the pandemic in the meantime.
Obviously, Jeremy's mentioned earlier on the health and safety at work legislation that applies. From your employment lawyer viewpoint, could you just reinforce some of those points, because of course they are fundamental to how a COVID-ready workplace needs to be set out from an employment lawyer, from a lawyer's perspective.
Yeah, so of course, so employers have both a statutory duty and a common law duties when it comes to health and safety. Obviously, the main statutory duties is underpinned by the Health and Safety Act at Work 1974, which places the general duty on companies, its directors, managers, employees, to ensure that it's as reasonably practical that the health and safety and welfare of all of their employees can be assured.
Okay. Now, Jeremy's already commented, I guess, about the agencies that may take action from that statutory position. But could you also mention, what potential penalties an employer may face if they fail to ensure that their workplace is COVID secure from an employee perspective?
Yeah, so of course, the Health and Safety Executive can take enforcement action against employees who don't take action to comply with the relevant public health legislation or guidance. And it could mean that employees themselves, if they are concerned that their employer hasn't met this criteria or guidance, could effectively report their employees to the Health and Safety Executive. And furthermore, in terms of other penalties that an employer might face, is that the employers themselves might be at risk of a potential claim from their employees in relation to constructive dismissal if an employer believes that their employer has breached their contract of employment by failing to ensure a safe working environment, and also other claims such as whistleblowing if they had previously raised these concerns before and they haven't been addressed, and that employees that thereon suffered any kind of detriment or dismissal as a result of those concerns. And lastly, potentially claims for disability discrimination if the person has a particular disability that is the reason they have these concerns in the first place, if reasonable adjustments haven't been made to the working environment to ensure their safety.
Okay. Jean has mentioned already that from our perspective, we've had to put in sort of certain arrangements just to give the business continuity some robustness. But from your perspective in advising employer clients, what do you think some of the key issues are that you've seen them face in some of the suggestions that you might have made to them?
So some of the key issues really for employers is putting the right measures in place, which can be a particular issue, particularly if they're a small business, which, you know, as part of the pandemic, they might not have been trading during that time. So there may be little or no income in order to support these changes being implemented in the workplace in terms of funding them themselves. So even when offices do start returning, as Jean has mentioned, they're likely to be at a limited capacity, with potentially only being a third of their full capacity at any one time, just to allow for social distancing as well. So that's obviously another consideration for employers during that period, as to if they haven't been trading, staff haven't been working from home, what are they going to do when they do open? Because all of the staff can't come back all in one go, essentially. So companies will essentially be having to weigh up how they want to operate in the future, particularly if they have been having a staff work from home and have seen the benefits in productivity or work-life balance as a result of that. So it's very much going to be looking towards the future and how a company wants to continue. However, obviously, of course, they are likely and may well suffer from resistance from their employees, who might still be fearful about returning back to the office, especially if they have been at home for the last couple of months.
If I pick up on that point, I mean, I guess you might have an environment where it's people are simply refusing to return back to the workplace. Well, what's your thoughts on that if an employer, business owner encounters that sort of resistance?
So if an employee is refusing to return to work when they are expected to do so and they have no reasonable grounds, then this is going to be treated as an unauthorised absence, and the employer may well dismiss on that ground. However, employers do need to be extremely cautious, particularly during this period, about any decisions to discipline or dismiss an employee, as employees have a right to protect themselves if they fear that they are in serious or imminent danger. And any dismissal which occurs after an employer has raised these health and safety concerns may well be deemed as automatically unfair for that reason. So if employees are unhappy about their returning, then they should, of course, obviously try and address those concerns firstly with their employer and discuss it together. But if they feel that ultimately that their employer hasn't addressed their concerns or listened to them, then they can obviously contact their local authority or the health and safety executive, who can effectively force firms to take action.
Okay, so let's assume, you know, the business owner, the employer wants to avoid things escalating to the local authority or one of the statutory agencies to do that. How does, you know, a business owner, employer go about consulting with employees to get them back into work?
So obviously it's going to be very important that employees essentially talk to their employees about the steps that they have taken or will take, and only bring them back to the work when it's safe to do so. So it's important that both employers and employees can discuss any concerns that they may have to really try and work together to reach any solutions that work for both parties. So one example of this might well be that the employee has no problem in coming back to work. They're satisfied that the employer has done everything they can to put every sort of health and safety measure in place, but they just don't feel comfortable in traveling back on public transport. So it might be that some kind of resolution or solution can be made in order to either allow that employee to carry on working from home or look to vary their hours potentially to avoid any kind of sort of busy peak times for travelling. And so it's really all going to be down to the communication between the employee and the employer to try and find solutions that work for both of them.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Samantha. I'm conscious of the time periods that we have when we're dealing with these webinars, so we will bring things to a conclusion here. My hope is that there were some helpful hints, pointers, views and guidance on what needs to be done by a business owner or employer in getting a workplace COVID secure, COVID ready. And if there are any queries, then please do get in contact. Thank you.